All during the year, we always hear about our founding fathers. When it's time to turn our Constitution into a living document that can be altered to fit the whims of the fringe, our founders are reduced to out-of-touch rich white guys who knew nothing about our world today or its issues. So, who were these rich white guys? You'd think from listening from the left, these men spent their whole lives delegating from a mansion or country club. By signing the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, these men didn't have time to pat themselves on the back and count their money. They became fugitives. The Declaration of Independence was read aloud once more, and debate resumed. Though Jefferson was the best writer of all of them, he had been somewhat verbose. Congress hacked away the excess. They did a good job, as a side-by-side comparison of the rough draft and final text shows. A total of 86 alterations were made. Almost 500 words were eliminated, leaving 1,337. At last, after 3 days of wrangling, the document was put to a vote. Here in this hall, Patrick Henry had once thundered, "I am no longer a Virginian, sir, but an American." But today, the loud, sometimes bitter argument stilled, and without fanfare, the vote was taken from north to south by colonies, as was the custom. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted. There were no trumpets blown. No one stood on their chair and cheered. The afternoon was waning, and Congress had no thought of delaying the full calendar of routine business on its hands. For several hours, they worked on many other problems before adjourning for the day. What kind of men were the 56 signers who adopted the Declaration of Independence, and who, by their signing, committed an act of treason against the Crown? To each of you, the names Franklin, Adams, Hancock, and Jefferson are the most familiar household words. However, most of us know nothing of the other signers. Who were they? What happened to them? I imagine that to many of you, you'll be surprised at some of the names not there. George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Patrick Henry, all were elsewhere. Ben Franklin was the only real old man. 18 were under 40, 3 were in their 20s. Of the 56, almost half, 24, were judges and lawyers. 11 were merchants, 9 were landowners and farmers, and the remaining 12 were doctors, ministers, and politicians. With only a few exceptions, such as Samuel Adams of Massachusetts, these were men of substantial property. All but 2 had families. The vast majority were men of education and standing in their communities. They had economic security, as few men had in the 18th century. Each had more to lose from revolution than he had to gain by it. John Hancock, one of the richest men in America, already had a price of 500 pounds on his head. He signed in enormous letters so that His Majesty could now read his name without glasses and could now double the reward. Ben Franklin wryly noted, "Indeed, we must all hang together, otherwise we shall most assuredly hang separately." Fat Benjamin Harrison of Virginia told tiny Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, "With me, it will all be over in a minute, but with you, you will be dancing on air an hour after I am gone." These men knew what they risked. The penalty for treason was death by hanging. And remember, a great British fleet was already at anchor in New York Harbor. They were sober men. There were no dreamy-eyed intellectuals or draft card burners here. They were far from hot-eyed fanatics yammering for an explosion. They simply asked for the status quo. It was change they resisted. It was equality with the mother country they desired. It was taxation with representation they sought. They were all conservatives, yet they rebelled. It was principle, not property, that had brought these men to Philadelphia. 2 of them became presidents of the United States. 7 of them became state governors. 1 died in office as Vice President of the United States. Several would go on to be U.S. Senators. William Ellery, delegate from Rhode Island, was curious to see the signers' faces as they committed this supreme act of personal courage. He saw some men sign quickly, but in no face was he able to discern real fear. Stephen Hopkins, Ellery's colleague from Rhode Island, was a man past 60. He signed with a shaking pen. He declared, "My hand trembles, but my heart does not." Even before the list was published, the British marked down every member of Congress suspected of having put his name to treason. All of them became objects of vicious manhunts. Some were taken. Some, like Jefferson, had narrow escapes. All who had property or families near British strongholds suffered. Francis Lewis, New York delegate, saw his home plundered and his estates in what is now known as Harlem completely destroyed by British soldiers. Mrs. Lewis was captured and treated with great brutality. Though she was later exchanged for 2 British prisoners through the efforts of Congress, she died from the effects of her abuse. William Floyd, another New York delegate, was able to escape with his wife and children across Long Island Sound to Connecticut, where they lived as refugees without income for 7 years. When they came home, they found a devastated ruin. Phillips Livingstone had all his great holdings in New York confiscated and his family driven out of their home. Livingstone died in 1778, still working in Congress for the cause. Lewis Morris, the 4th New York delegate, saw all of his crops, timber, and livestock taken. For 7 years, he was barred from his home and family. John Hart of Trenton, New Jersey, risked his life to return home to see his dying wife. Hessian soldiers rode after him, and he escaped into the woods. While his wife lay on her deathbed, the soldiers ruined his farm and wrecked his homestead. Hart, 65, slept in caves in the woods as he was hunted across the countryside. When at long last, emancipated by hardship, he was able to sneak home, he found his wife had already been buried and his 13 children taken away. He never saw them again. He died a broken man in 1779 without ever finding his family. Dr. John Witherspoon Signer was president of the College of New Jersey, later called Princeton. The British occupied the town of Princeton and billeted troops in the college. They trampled and burned the finest college library in the country. Judge Richard Stockton, another New Jersey delegate signer, had rushed back to his estate in an effort to evacuate his wife and children. The family found refuge with friends, but a sympathizer betrayed them. Judge Stockton was pulled from his bed in the night and brutally beaten by the arresting soldiers. Thrown into a common jail, he was deliberately starved. Congress finally arranged for Stockton's parole, but his health was ruined. The judge was released as an invalid when he could no longer harm the British cause. He returned home to find his estate looted and did not live to see the triumph of the Revolution. His family was forced to live off charity. George Clymer, Pennsylvania signer, escaped with his family, but their home and property was completely destroyed by the British in the Germantown and Brandywine campaigns. Dr. Benjamin Rush, also from Pennsylvania, was forced to flee to Maryland. As a heroic surgeon with the Army, Rush had several narrow escapes. John Morton, a Tory in his views previous to the debate, lived in a strongly loyalist area of Pennsylvania. When he came out for independence, most of his neighbors and even some of his relatives ostracized him. He was a sensitive and troubled man, and many believed this action killed him. When he died in 1777, his last words to his tormentors were, "Tell them that they will live to see the hour when they shall acknowledge it to have been the most glorious service that I have rendered to my country." William Ellery, Rhode Island delegate, saw his property and home burned to the ground. Thomas Lynch Jr., South Carolina delegate, had his health broken from privation and exposures while serving as a company commander in the military. His doctors ordered him to seek a cure in the West Indies, and on the voyage, he and his young bride were drowned at sea. Of those 56 who signed the Declaration of Independence, 9 died of wounds or hardships during the war. 5 were captured and imprisoned, in each case with brutal treatment. Several lost wives, sons, or entire families. One lost his 13 children. 2 wives were brutally treated. All were at one time or another the victims of manhunts and driven from their homes. 12 signers had their homes completely burned. 17 lost everything they owned. Yet not one defected or went back on his pledged word. Their honor and the nation they sacrificed so much to create is still intact. And finally, there is the New Jersey signer Abraham Clark. He gave 2 sons to the officer corps in the Revolutionary Army. They were captured and sent to the infamous British prison hulk afloat in New York Harbor known as the Hell Ship, Jersey, where 11,000 American captives were to die. The younger Clarks were treated with a special brutality because of their father. One was put in solitary with no food. With the end almost in sight and with the war almost won, no one could have blamed Abraham Clark for seceding to the British request when they offered him his sons' lives if he would recant and come out for the king in Parliament. The utter despair in this man's heart, the anguish in his very soul, must reach out to every one of us down through the 200 years with this answer: no, The 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence proved by their every deed that they made no idle boast when they composed the most magnificent curtain line in history. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.